Like I said, featured review this week is Civil War, the new film written and directed by Alex Garland. I'm going to go first on this one and talk about Civil War. This has been a very polarizing movie, as you can imagine. If you know anything about the premise, this is documenting a potential civil war in the United States that could happen today. That kind of looks like in today's world what a civil war would look like and how it would be. But it's not at all really what you would expect at the same time. It doesn't really focus on the how or the why or anything like that. Instead, it focuses on this group of war photographers, and they are our main characters, played by Kirsten Dunst, Wagner Moura, Kaylee Spaney, and Stephen McKinley Henderson. And they are wandering around finding the fight, and you see what it takes for these journalists to get the story in a war zone. The only difference is that war zone is at home, and there are some things that are kind of reference to that as you go along, but really I think the story is watching these characters and seeing how they have to view what's going on through through their lens instead of actually being involved in the fight. The third act does kind of devolve into more of the let's get into the war here and exactly what it is. I didn't necessarily love the third act, but I loved the first two acts. I thought it was very it was very interestingly told. The performances are amazing. Kirsten Dunst is great. Kaylee Spaney, I think, just completely knocks her role out of the park, and she's amazing in this. Of course, you do have the scene with Jesse Plemons where he pops up in the trailer. That is one of the best scenes in the whole movie. And I don't know, I thought this movie was super cool. Like I said, I didn't love the way it took the ending, but that's because like I said, it devolves into something else, and I would have liked to see it continue to ride the ride it had already started to what they were trying to accomplish. I thought that would have been a really interesting way of taking it. But as it is, I'm giving this movie 3.5 stars. It's in the running for the best movie I've seen so far this year. I really was into it. It was quiet. It was brooding at times, which Alex Garland movies are, and I think it totally worked in this. So 3.5 stars for Civil War from me. Next, we are going to go to Zach.
Okay, so A24 really tried to pump the marketing of this movie as it being about a civil war. So you might have seen on some of their, social media, are you in the Florida faction? Are you in the Carolinas? Apparently, California and Texas team up. Alex Garland is not from the United States, so maybe he's not aware of how unfathomable it would be that California and Texas would ever team up in anything except for having some great In-N-Out restaurants. But this is a movie that definitely has an intriguing premise. I think it fails to deliver in a lot of ways. I like Alex Garland. I defended Men. I like his movie. I even defended Annihilation. But to me, this is a movie that it is like Spotlight in the Post if it was directed by Catherine Bigelow. I mean, this is a movie that is very much less interested in the concept of a civil war, way more interested in how journalists are saving the world. And hey, I'm cool with that. I mean, journalists don't get nearly enough recognition, although they've been, I think, maybe recognized quite a bit in recent movies, better recent movies. This movie, I think, is getting criticized, I think rightly, for making the Civil War in the background, not really elaborating on the cause of the Civil War. And I think what Alex Garland would say is that he's not really interested in pointing fingers. He doesn't want to make this a movie that is about right wing versus left wing, red versus blue states. And in that attempt, I think the movie skirts the issue in a lot of ways. And I think it's a movie that feels way too broad, way too general. And I know a lot of people have a problem with that in the movie. For me, it's only like the third biggest problem. Okay. I don't really care if Nick Offerman is supposed to be Trump or not. I think the movie does sort of have a left-wing agenda, but I don't really, I think it's a little bit irresponsible to say that, both sides are going to cause the Civil War. I mean, whatever. But that's to me less of an issue in the movie. The apolitical nature of it, whatever. Okay. What I don't like about the movie is I think it's sort of a dumb movie. I think that the movie takes this kind of very standard formula, a kind of a war movie formula about, you got the grizzled veteran in Kirsten Dunst, you got the newbie in Kaylee Spaney, you've got Stephen, what's his name? Stephen McKinley, who, and I gotta say, all due respect to Stephen McKinley, he wins the Matt Damon "What Movie Are You In" award. I mean, this guy's like 75 years old. He can't really move around. I'm not really sure why he's on the battleground. Whenever I see that actor, I think of him as Lady Bird's drama teacher. So maybe it's just a me problem, but I don't know. He didn't feel right in the movie. The movie is very passionate about how these journalists are saving the world, and they're meant to depict everything. Well, let's look at a few things, okay? First of all, they take pictures. They don't do any video. They don't do any reporting. They're just kind of there as, I think, glorified tabloid folks. And yeah, thank you, Adam. That is the movie we are reviewing. And I don't think the movie has a lot of depth to say about journalism. I think you get A24, you get Alex Garland, you think, oh, this is a very heady movie. It's not. I mean, this movie, I think, is kind of dumb. It's kind of like Olympus Has Fallen. It feels like a Purge movie. It basically just has these Terry said it's a quiet movie. I don't know what Terry watched. This movie was really loud. There's lots of bullets. There's lots of violence in the movie. I don't object to violence, but it comes somewhat at the expense of storytelling. There was a little bit of like the Hurt Locker in this movie, in the sense that these reporters, I don't know if they're really trying to preserve democracy as much as they are adrenaline junkies. And I get it. I'm sure some journalists are adrenaline junkies, but the Hurt Locker was like very much a character study. And this movie the characters feel like archetypes. They feel like stand-ins for bigger ideas. To me, I could just never buy it. There's a few things in this movie that are, I think, comically unrealistic. The Jesse Plemons scene, which, by the way, probably is the best scene in the movie. The way that scene gets resolved, that involves Stephen McKinley, is ridiculous. That's laughably bad. There's a lot of contrivances about how much access they're able to get, and then at the end, their pursuit of the president. Again, Terry kind of alluded to it, just ridiculous. I didn't really believe it. The Hurt Locker, Catherine Bigelow's, aesthetic always feels grounded in reality. She uses a lot of shaky cam. There was never a second in this movie that I didn't feel like it was a movie. It felt like big action set pieces, and it again didn't really feel like it had a lot of depth. I feel like if you're going to make a movie that defends journalists, there's so much more ripe stuff to do, especially with the situation now in the world. I get it. Okay, Alex Garland doesn't make it. He doesn't want to make 20 Days in Mariupol. He doesn't want to make a movie set in Gaza. I get it. But at the same time, I think the thought that this movie is really trying to preserve democracy is a little bit of an ego trip from Alex Garland. We worship him, I think, in the same way that we worship Christopher Nolan. I think his ego is definitely at the centerpiece of this movie, not so much the messaging. The two things I like about this movie, the two closest things to redeeming it are, I think Kirsten Dunst is interesting in the movie. I'm really glad she's not doing MCU bullshit and she's making actually interesting choices in her career like this one. And mercifully, the movie is somehow under 2 hours. It seemed ripe for a movie that was of 2.5 hours. So I appreciate that it's on the shorter side, but it didn't do it for me. It's a 2-star movie. I like Alex Garland stuff normally, but this one was just a bit of a mess.
All right. We're going to go to Todd next.
Yeah. So I saw this on Thursday night, and I was the only one in the theater. That was interesting. But this is it's probably a more interesting movie to reflect on than it is to the actual process of watching it. But when you're watching it, I think it's like kind of a breathless thriller, and it does have some the Purge in there with the compelling action, but it's more character focused than just being all out in the streets and the chaos. And I mean, you had to know the trailers were going to be misleading. This is nothing like what the trailers advertised, at least what I was expecting. The images in the movie are pretty startling, and the implications are complex and dark and not easy to digest. Like, you'll see something happen and then you'll see those characters completely flip in the next scene. You're just like, wow. So like basically everybody is horrible in this movie, and it's an interesting way of telling it, like because it's a fictitious war, kind of, but it's a real country in modern times, and you can see the pathway to get there, which is a ballsy thing to do for Alex Garland. And yeah, he's not American, so he doesn't necessarily understand everything. But telling it from the perspective of the journalist, I think, is interesting because it is trying to show, like, objective journalism is important, and and even though they are also biased and they tell their own stories and wash them and do what they're going to do, like seeing them and their correspondence with the soldiers and the rebels is really kind of what helps move the story along. And it's an astute way to tell it, and you could start to see what Garland is saying, how the enemy is kind of everybody, and we're not all that different in the grand scheme of things, and you would band together if you had some like dictatorial president in like that took power in the United States. And there are no real sides, and you see that with the different groups, like because you might not even know who you're fighting for, or if you're even fighting, like those two like sniper soldiers, like that was a really interesting scene, and it was like unfathomable to the journalists, like, and wait, you don't even know who you're fighting for. You're like, because it's pretty much like, okay, you have two fringe factions against each other and everybody else is out for survival essentially. And I think that's a really interesting concept, and something that I don't think I've really seen portrayed on screen before, because there's no winners or losers. It just, the war makes less and less sense the deeper you get into it. And I don't know. I mean, this is kind of where the country could be heading. Like, it's kind of terrifying as a scope of like what's possible, because when you treat every little thing as a life or death situation, you like everybody becomes a savage, and like nobody wins, and you would have these like little offshoot like things that happen, like these crazy people at a gas station. Like, I mean, like those things absolutely would be what would happen in a situation where everything just goes to hell, and you become like a war-torn country. And so like watching the end of the movie where they're actually like pursuing the White House and stuff, like you're supposed to feel that like Zero Dark 30 kind of like adrenaline thing when you're going to, get Bin Laden or whatever. But then for me, it was like, when you think about it, you're like cringing, because it's like, this is the perspective of something so inhumane, and how we treat that when it doesn't involve the United States. Like when you're seeing that happen to the White House, I was just like, that was what was most powerful to me, is like, and I think the movie works a lot because of those kind of things, and just how real it feels, even though it's an action movie. And I like the action. There's like shades of The Covenant in there, and there's like it becomes a video game in certain scenes, which I think works. And it's that entertainment value that is able to get the message that is profound and confounding at the same time. I found the movie incredibly hard to shake for like days, and like I said, I watched it by myself. Jesse Plemons is awesome in this. So, like any role like that, he just kills. I think it might be Kirsten Dunst's best performance. I had no idea that was Kaylee Spaney. Like, I guess I don't really know who she is. Like, I guess I just thought that she was Priscilla or something. I didn't realize how young she was. I thought that character was like 14. But this is Garland's best film, and the debate will rage on about this movie. Unlike Men, which everyone just brushed off, but I think we all liked that movie. It was so out there, but this one is much more direct and grounded in a reality I don't think any of us really want to see. Yeah, it's 3.5 stars. It's the best movie I've seen this year for sure.
All right, Adam, I know you're on right now because you wanted to talk about this. Where do you fall on this one?
So this movie, so I've been doing some of these overlap reviews with you guys. I've been doing my own perspective on the Daily Notes side of things on some of these movies, like Love Lies Bleeding, and there's another road. No, there's another one out there too. But the Civil War, I felt like I can't do this by myself. I have to be on the podcast. This is what really can. After I saw it on Thursday night, and I saw it with about 25 people in the theater. And what was fascinating about this is that there was a lot of talking and side conversations going on while I was watching the movie, and rightfully so, because I was like also leaning over to my wife and watching it. This is her favorite movie this year, not quite my favorite, but what I will say is that this movie got a visceral reaction out of everybody in the theater, where one couple was like applauding the ending of the movie when the credits were rolling, and everybody else was just left in silence and actually sat there in place while the credits were rolling, kind of thinking about it. This is again, Kirsten Dunst. If she's not a Pinot nominated actress at the end of the year, I don't know what we're doing. She's fantastic in this. Kaylee Spaney is great. and there is some possibilities for some Matt Damon awards there too. But that, especially knowing that we don't know how this started, and I don't think that it really matters how the war started. It has a lot of like action set pieces that may take away from a little bit of the overall feeling from some people, which I understand where Zach's coming from here. I thought stuff was super effective. I think that I played a lot of video games in my life, and the games that came to my mind, very reminiscent to this, Freedom Riders, which takes place, not Freedom Riders, that's a Hilary Swank movie. Freedom Fighters.
Hilary Swank?
Hilary Swank. Is that the video game version?
Hilary Swank. Sorry, the whiskey got to me. But no, Freedom Fighters is another game that takes place in New York. It's very similar, like different factions and stuff. But there's also a game called Homefront, which we're being invaded from a different country and takes place on our soil. So seeing a lot of these different things kind of reminded me of those games that I used to play. And you don't know how these things start, but you know that how things end. And seeing the finale here, it speaks volumes, like how well we need to have like solicited documentation of these images, like having these people, the press here document what's going on. I think that's fascinating. Knowing that Jesse Plemons got brought in very late into the process, and he wasn't the main actor. Kirsten Dunst basically said we had asked to bring him on here from Alex Garland. That's fascinating in fact to know, because he blows that scene out of the park. I really like this movie a lot. It's not quite my favorite, and I do have a poll out on YouTube currently about what is the best Alex Garland movie. I'm at 3.5 stars here as well. I think another thing that's not really getting talked about, this is A24. This is not a typical A24 movie. They usually are dark, grimy. We may mention movies like The Lighthouse, obviously, like Love Lies Bleeding is another one. Like the movies feel different. This is like the first film that actually got this huge visceral box office support from people of A24 and mainstream fans as well. People are going there because it's A24, and also just because what the subject matter is. It's going to rage a lot of conversation and debate on what's going to happen, and there's some things you could pull away that, hey, we need to learn so we don't get to this point in our history of the world. So, very thought-provoking movie for me. So that's why I would like to be on here with you guys to discuss it. So 3.5 stars.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about it, and a couple of you mentioned it is so apolitical. Right, it doesn't really care. And going into it, like if that's what you were expecting going in, like this is going to be the movie that's going to talk about what's going to start the next civil war in our country. That's not what this is. But one of the things I kept thinking about as I was watching it is, as I journey through all the Oscar movies, I've seen several movies about war photographers, and what you get in those movies though is you get the war photographer talking about their war photography. And what I thought was so cool is this is what it takes for those guys to get what they have and to get those shots. And yeah, there are there's a lot of loud parts of this and big action sets, but in between there's a lot of quiet, just like it's like there's a big action set and then it's just a quiet contemplative moment to just kind of let it sink in. And Adam, I experienced the same thing. There were people in the crowd that were having conversations because it gave you opportunities in the movie to have those conversations, because it had those quiet moments where nothing was happening. And
it didn't subtract from usually when that happens, it's like it takes away from the overall experience. In this movie, I didn't mind it. It didn't bother me.
No. So
the only comment that hurt it was that somebody said, well, she's gained a lot of weight. Who cares what Kirsten Dunst looked like 20 years ago? It doesn't matter. She's fantastic. Shut up.
Well, there's a whole scene about her trying on a dress. So, I mean,
that was before the dress scene happened, though. That's the thing.
I looked at it if you would have thought, 20 years ago, watching her play Mary Jane, that she was eventually going to be a war photographer, Like that is not where you see Kirsten Dunst's career going, but it works, and she works in this.
She always makes good decisions. I mean, look at Melancholia. Look at some of the movies. I mean, I like her unconventional choices, and I think she's good in the movie. I just don't. I think the characters are bland. I think, like, you guys are talking about the macro picture of the movie, and I get it. I think that's what Alex Garland wants us to think about. What are the big implications of the future of the United States? But a lot of this movie is just these four people in a car. And frankly, they don't have a lot of deep conversations, and we don't know anything about the conflict. Now, I get if he's trying to stay apolitical, even though, again, I think the movie actually is left-wing. I mean, I don't think you get a lot of right-wingers that want to defend journalism or would have that Jesse Plemons scene. But what the problem with that isn't necessarily the apolitical nature. It's just that there's not a lot of detail about the conflict. We don't know who these people are. And Todd is right to say, to people sniping at each other in a purposeless context just undermines the insanity. I get that, but I don't understand why we should be valorizing these journalists so much if we don't understand the nature of the conflict. Who are they reporting to? They say they work for Reuters, but who's reading anything? The bystanders seem to be unaware of what's going on in the Civil War, and it's like, you want to focus on these characters that are doing Yemen's work and they're putting themselves on the line. Make it about a conflict that I think is more tangible. I would say, like. Don't try to set up this future scenario that, frankly, Alex Garland doesn't really have a lot of interest in answering very practical, hypothetical questions about, and then expect us to feel for these characters. Again, I think there's a lot of war movie cliches in this movie. I think what ultimately happens with Kirsten Dunst and Kaylee Spaney, that I've seen that in a million other movies. I think that there's lines in this movie I think are really hokey. Like Kaylee Spaney says something to the effect of, I've never been this scared in my life, but this is also the most alive I've ever felt. Come on. There's another scene where Stephen McKinley tells Kirsten Dunst you don't like her or you're mad at her because she reminds you of yourself. I mean, glib dialogue. I don't know. I understand that there's a sort of freshness and the experience of these people coming across these different situations, but it didn't add up to a whole lot. And I'm sorry, but the White House door being open at the end of the movie, I mean, that is just, and the way that the movie ends, the last line of the movie, these are supposed to be great journalists that are trying to get the story. That's what they're going to ask, and that's how the movie's going to end. I don't think so. And again, the idea behind the movie is fine, but the execution, I think, leaves a lot to be desired.
I think
but in a way, that's maybe what the point of the movie is. I'm sorry, Adam. And it does generate good conversation. I almost want to give Garland credit for that, but for me, it just didn't work.
I think that the ending line was, it's like he had no really, what other choice did he have? Those soldiers were going to do what they were going to do. That they didn't care. They're like, just stay out of our way. We're going to do this mission.
The whole mission, too, to the White House felt like a screenwriter. I mean, it felt like, we need to get these characters on the move. We need them to go somewhere and accomplish something. It didn't feel very, very realistic about what journalists actually do.
I thought Rory Kinnear should have played the president. We needed him back.
Maybe he would have birthed another president.
Yeah. See, that would have been the A24 thing.
That would have made it an A24 movie. For sure.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. Adam and Todd and I are at 3.5 stars with this. Zach, you said 2 stars?
2 stars. And I applaud you, Terry, for going in the right order this time. I was glad to go right after you. You read my mind, knew my moves ahead of time.
Yep. I was just thinking, I'm like, who's gonna think has the best odds of being exact opposite of me? I'm like, Zach hated this movie.
Well, you already heard Adam's review.
I actually didn't watch it. I didn't look at it at all because I wanted to just stay out of it. So
fresh, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to keep it all fresh. Okay.